Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about student debt. Actually, I know this is something I've talked about before, but interestingly, the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee revealed evidence the student loan book would grow to over £1 trillion over the next 25 years. Now that's a lot of money for a fair number of people, but that's such a vast amount of cash, and the committee attacked the whole thing as deeply unfair, both in terms of the system of fees and the loans themselves. Um, and then the Department of Education said that they would be reviewing fees to make sure that students are getting value for money. Now, firstly, at the moment they're not getting value for money. They haven't got value for money for a long time, and that's simply because, especially considering time that I've worked at a university, friends, family, Hannah, who have been at university, for the amount of money that they are paying, they are getting nowhere near enough. And especially considering how little university actually teaches you in regards to preparing you for the workplace, preparing you for environments that you are going to have to go and deal with. It just doesn't, and it's by no means good enough. It's one of the biggest problems that we are facing as time moves on. But the report put out by this committee called for immediate reforms. But there are some comments made by the committee chairman, Lord Forsyth, that I want to kind of touch on. And he said that one of the first things he said was that it all seemed to be part of a fiscal illusion. And to quote him, he said, "The thing that shocked me, and I thought I was pretty unshockable, was that I had not understood that by moving to a system of funding through loans because of the accounting methods of the Treasury, it was possible for George Osborne, then Chancellor, to appear to increase funding for higher education by 3 billion, but at the same time cut his deficit by 3.8 billion." And it's like, yeah, this isn't anything new. This is what I've said in other videos in the past. You need debt as part of a system, especially the kind of economic system that we have at the moment in the world, and especially within the UK and within the United States, where it's kind of socio-capitalistic. Yeah, you have to have debt as part of that system, as we've seen in the past with, say, the Clinton administration, where they tried to get rid of debt, kind of national debt, in a big way. It meant that the banks then didn't have enough money to continue to cycle. And so as a result, they needed to find a way to kind of rework debt. And one of the things that I talked about not so long ago in a video about how the current generation are, or kind of millennials, are worse off than the last 2 or 3 generations. It's a case of, yeah, the way that debt was established before was in regards to debt for things like houses, things that are solid, things that then had resale value and whatever else. Whilst when it comes to the millennial generation, the people who are suffering under these fees and from the loans that they will have to pay at the moment, it's just a means of moving all of that debt onto the younger generation, so that the money gets cycled. You punish the people for when the money can't be cycled, because that person doesn't earn enough, because that person doesn't have access to the funds to pay back, because they did a course that they're never going to get a job with, whatever. And as a result, it kind of breaks things down over time. It means that you've got young people that don't have something solid, something significant to then resale or reuse as a result of that debt, because all of that goes into them, and then if they can't market themselves or use the skills that they have learned, or if they've done a course that just is either in a very niche field where there just aren't enough jobs, or in a very oversaturated field where there are only a certain number of jobs but way too many applicants, then you're going to have those people running into problems. And he went on to say that the public argument for cutting the deficit was so that debt wasn't handed on to the next generation, but for this generation being asked to pay these loans when they've eventually paid them off, they'll suddenly find there's a bill for £1.2 trillion. I hadn't realised that was happening. And this is the problem. There's a lot of people, especially people even in leadership in our government, both in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, that don't have an understanding of how this is going on. And this is where I get a little bit annoyed with how there are so many lawyers and PR people, marketing people and whatever else in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, when none of them really have the understanding of the mechanisms that they are then put in charge of. And I'm not saying they need a huge amount of understanding. What I'm saying is that they need to have, that needs to be structures put in place for them to not have to have an understanding because they are surrounded by people who do. Have them be a chairman of a think tank to develop a solution that then liaises with the rest of the government, rather than having them just be there to call shots. Doesn't make as much sense, at least not to me. But in this particular instance, you're looking at huge amounts of debt being passed on and no one's realising. And especially considering that it's like, oh, well, everyone's in debt. Yeah, but what are they in debt for? If you've got a mortgage, you're in debt for a thing that you can then sell on. If you're in debt for a car, then yeah, you won't get the same value when you need to get rid of it, because it will depreciate quite significantly. But you will still get some kind of return, and that also allows you other opportunities and assets that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to take hold of, in terms of an actual physical thing that you can get hold of. If you've got a vehicle, you can travel greater distances in terms of a completely physical sense. Saying to someone that because they have an education, because they've got some kind of additional qualifications, that they can go further, really and truly they may not, and there's a good chance that they won't, just based off it. Especially considering the we have qualifications being now so readily kind of taken up by people who just leave school. It's just that next thing that you do. It's high school plus. It's that next part of the progression. And yet it's that next part of the progression that costs them or their parents or a mixture of both a huge amount of money. And as Lord Forsyth points out, this system has had devastating consequences. And where the excessive interest rates are one of the things that they pick up on, saying that it's crazy to have a 6.3% interest rate on these things for young people who aren't even, you're starting them off at the beginning of their life with this huge amount of debt, when you don't even know whether or not they'll be able to pay it back, whether or not they'll be earning, whether or not they'll be able to develop into a situation when they can. And the committee says that these rates should be capped at no higher than the rate at which the government borrows, which is 1.5%. That's what, 4 times as much now, over 4 times as much, in terms of the current interest rate compared to what they're saying it should be. And then on top of that, he dives into who suffers the most. And to quote him again, he says, "The people who get screwed by this are those in middling jobs. This was all done on the basis that it would create a market in higher education, and that has failed. There isn't a market." He goes on to say that this is that this has all turned out to be a bit of a joke. And so, it's again, I can't fault him for saying that. The people who are going to suffer most are the people who are in middling jobs, because they're the ones who are going to have to sit and suffer the longest with this amount to pay. They're the people who are going to have it hanging over their head for the longest time. And you're going to have these individuals who are just stuck. and yet then we're still going to have this big deficit kicking around at the end when it's when it's all said and done. As said, the 1.2 billion potentially trillion rather left over from everything, even after these people have finished paying off their student loans. And so moving on from that, they say the part-time students have diminished over time, and there's a lot less in terms of funding for vocational courses. And as they point out, as I've already mentioned, the funding system is based around school leavers beginning full-time degree courses, not around people retraining, not around people looking to improve vocational skills or work through stuff as they go, as it were. And that's not even to mention the fact that the number of places that have decided to start getting just accredited to run their own off-qual certified courses internally within large corporations and businesses, rather than send people off to a university, is growing hugely. With the number of, don't put it in charge of local education authority, don't put it in charge of a university or whatever else, take it on board with a corporate that will provide their own trainers, do their own thing, and then as a result it kind of cascades and develops, and it's just a university to say yay or nay if it's good enough. I mean, it's some of the standards that I was put under when I did a level 6 qualification through a workplace that I was part of. It was, and in regards to some of my other stuff, my coaching qualifications as well, some of the stuff that I have had to do to get those qualifications compared to the equivalent for people doing a bachelor's degree in similar subjects, I've had to do at times substantially more, and I've also gained the work experience as a result of doing it through a workplace. But then looking at this situation and the things that are going on here, it's again, it's people who want to retrain. I worked with a guy who was late 50s, early 60s, I guess, and he went to retrain and do a degree in psychology, and I ended up actually helping him with it because there were certain things that he needed to get his head around, and he had never come across before. So we sat down, had a chat. But again, he was lucky enough to be able to fund it entirely by himself, take the time out, and just have a part-time job working with me in a kind of store, like corporate chain store environment, and so as a result he was able to do that for himself and by himself. But there are an awful lot of people who, when they want to retrain, they want to retrain for the purpose of moving into somewhere where they can earn money, where they can do more to support themselves and develop themselves. And then when they look for the funding to do so, firstly, the prices are incredibly high. Secondly, there's just nothing worked out for them. So yeah, it's a pretty horrific effect. Again, the committee chairman, Lord Forsyth, says there's been a huge distorting effect and it's a huge mistake. And then moving on, he says they look at target setting and how that has been a kind of thing to push for, X number of people going into higher education, X number of people doing this, X number of people doing that. And he says it has encouraged quantity rather than quality. And, it's kind of evident that that's the case. You've got an awful lot of people being funneled into university as it's just the next thing you do. And yet then when you get there, the education isn't up to scratch. You don't get taught anything. You don't get prepared for the next steps in your life within the things that you want to do. The number of people, as I've said in videos before, who have had much higher levels of qualifications than I have, who have been in no way prepared for the world of work, who've come and joined businesses that I've been part of, and they've not been able to keep up with the level of work, to act professionally, to even really understand what they're supposed to be doing. The level of care and attention that they take, the level of pride in their work, the level of pride in themselves that they take is often very low, and it's always kind of this thing that just cycles on and doesn't help anybody. Um, as I've mentioned and quoted numerous times, Simon Sinek with his quotes on the Millennial Problem, when he talks to both millennial individuals and people in big business, and he's finding the big disconnect. You know, it's that kind of thing. The is being kind of caused by these issues. You know, this monetary issue at the base of everything else. And then when it says he goes on to say, there is clear evidence that what the economy needs is more people with technical and vocational skills, but the way that the funding for fees and maintenance operates makes it pretty well impossible for us to meet that demand. So in other words, a lot of people that would potentially just like to go and work with their hands, go and do more, yeah, go and build more, work more, yeah, find that thing that they just like doing and go with it. A lot of them are being funneled towards things like civil engineering degrees, various forms of product design and development degrees, and things like that, rather than just being given the technical and vocational skill qualifications. Potentially, even if you wanted to make them of the same level, then sure, but they're not being given the access to those, to the extent that then they can learn the skills, go and do what they want, and still contribute to society in a meaningful and useful way, which, you know, we're not meeting in this country, and we haven't been for a long time. But again, it's becoming a more prominent issue now, considering a lot of the people that were doing those jobs were EU citizens, and they, as a result of things like Brexit, they're now looking to leave, and problems are kind of developing as a result. But it's a set of situations that we've seen before, and I've talked about this in other videos, where it's pushing the debt onto young people to cycle the money for as long as possible. It's not actually there to help anybody other than the people at the top who just want to be able to look good and keep those wheels spinning. You know, there are other ways around it. There are much better ways around it. And yet, because of the people that we have had in charge basically since I was in school, because this all kicked off with the last Labour government under Tony Blair, under Gordon Brown, and it's just kind of continued through the coalition government, through Cameron, and now into May. It's all just been this kind of on-running system where it's just kind of broken. And so as a result, yeah, you know, you've got various individuals from various foundations who have all agreed with this, or kind of kicks things into gear. One person in particular who I think puts it very well is Alice Barnard, who's the chief executive of the Edge Foundation that promotes vocational education, apparently. And she clearly she said that it clearly highlights how the funding bias in our higher education system has favoured universities at the expense of choice and opportunity for young people, which, you know, again, I agree with. You know, when I was in school, which was just before the kind of age at which you needed to stay in school went up, and before, like, the last time I looked at going into university, it was still £4,000-5,000 tuition per year, I think, for me to go. And when I first looked, when I was first thinking of moving on post school, it was a case of like £3,000, you know, compared to it now being 3 times that much. You know, in basic, that's a big growth for no real change in regards to what's being taught, and the systems and the other things that are in place around those universities to help those students. And, you know, it's a fascinating thing to look at, because then you look at the universities, and some of them, yeah, because of the way that they have then, the money that they have got, they have reinvested it, they have worked with it in certain ways, those universities have been able to prop themselves up, and the students have somewhat benefited from it, not necessarily through teaching, but through other facilities that are available. But then you look at the kind of rest of what's going on, and you've got university professors and teachers striking and complaining about conditions. You've got people who are looking at the courses that they're doing, and they're in for 2 days a week, if that, when they're paying thousands of pounds a year. And they're not, and that's removed from the books and the other things that they have to do. The courses are very poorly constructed in certain instances, with teachers at times being able to do things that are, quite frankly, just bizarre, considering some of the things that we've been seeing coming out of universities over the last few years. So I feel like there are a few things that need to happen here. Firstly, yes, absolutely agree with the capping of things like the interest rate on student loans, and some of the other things that have been mentioned in this particular place, where this particular report from this committee, where they've said that they need to make very swift changes and remedy this as fast as possible. Immediate reforms is what's been called for specifically, and it's a case of, yes, that needs to happen, but then also you need to go into those universities. You need to cut down on the bullshit. You need to streamline everything. You need to appraise the tutors and the professors more strictly, because that's how you get quality. You don't get it by setting quotas, and you won't get it just by lowering the cost to the people. If you want the highest quality for the most reasonable price, then you sort out the pricing so that it is reasonable. If at all, there was a time when free university was still a thing in this country, a long time ago, but there it is. All those people in government who benefited from a completely free education. But then the other thing you need to do is you need to streamline university tutelage. You need to make sure that certain things aren't done. It needs to be a course that, as part of a university, it needs to be a place that encourages thought and expression and discussion, not closing things off, not locking things down, not judging other people as well. And then moving on from that, we need to make sure that the university has everything that it needs and everything that it requires for itself. There are courses and individuals where I've seen them having to be sent randomly off online to go and use various websites that the university has no way of interacting with, no way of controlling, because they're private companies, and they've been sending their students off to use those, supply their information to those websites, supply those their various workloads through that website, and that's not on, because they should be protecting and maintaining and controlling the environment that the students are in, and some random site that they can't interact with from God knows where, especially one that might have a monetary bent, or one that's very, very open to the public, like social media, for instance. All of those things are outside of the control of the university. They therefore are very difficult to mark, very difficult to interact with, and so it comes down to the university should be granted access to tools to teach without sending their students off to places that, especially when the students may very well not even want to go there, but they have to sign up if they want the grade. It's a set of situations where it needs to be contained, it needs to be worked with, it needs to be increased in quality through greater scrutiny, whilst the monetary side of things is dealt with. And then again, we need to see that shift in our economy back towards long-term investments with a potential kind of resale value at the end, that further enrichment at the end, rather than just dumping all of the money onto the young people so that it stays, that debt remains for the longest time, so the money keeps cycling. There are better ways of doing this. We've seen them in other places around the world. We've, in certain instances, kicked those other places around the world off into doing it. We can do it too. It's not that difficult. It just takes a bit of elbow grease. But anyway, it was nice to see an actual kind of individual or group of individuals in authority have finally realised what's going on. But anyway, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I realise that a lot of you guys are over in the States, and this is very much a UK thing. But again, you guys in the States, you guys get horribly screwed with the price of your university, and especially considering the level of quality and some of the structuring of your university that just doesn't allow you to specialise. It doesn't give you that comparative qualification to people elsewhere in the world necessarily, without a lot more study and catch-up work afterwards. Depending on subject, obviously, but it's something that everywhere should be taking into account. There are lots of places that are able and make it a big point of providing free further education, free higher education, to further enrich those individuals, further enrich the country that they're living in through higher standards and quality of individuals that they have working there. And this is something that a lot of places, especially those that have decided that money is so important, have decided to kind of slant the other way, so that the young people are just the pack horse that carries all the debt for the longest time possible until it dies. And then by that point, it's only the young people that are going to have to deal with that problem that has been left by prior generations. And as Lord Forsyth said, in regards to the public argument for cutting the deficit, was so that debt wasn't handed on to the next generation. And yet here it still is. We're going to be handed this load of stuff because a whole load of people who are outside of that environment now and who got it for free themselves have decided that we can't. And so it's I'm glad that they finally caught up, and I'm glad that someone's finally calling out some shots on these kind of things. Whether they get paid attention to, who knows, but here's hoping. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys, and otherwise thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. No, later. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the video later. Take care.